Maseches Chagiga Daf Ches contains one Mishnah, but the entire Daf is one Sugya. It's a discussion of the carbon Chagiga and whether you're allowed to add other Kodesh funds, other obligation that you have to bring to the Beis HaMikdash. Can you use some of that money to buy carbon Chagiga? The Gemara will discuss whether or not you're allowed to do that. We saw that that's a machlokes. The Gemara will then discuss if you are allowed to do it, how exactly do you add? Do you add more animals or do you add more money in the same animal? That's a machlokes amarayim. And the Gemara will bring brises on each side, and then a third opinion in that machlokes amarayim. Along the way, the Gemara will mention shalmei simcha, what you're allowed to use to buy shalmei simcha. And the Gemara will also discuss if you have too many karbanos chagiga, is it a problem of bal tosef? Are you bringing too many karbanos? Is that an issue? That'll be at the end of the daf. So let's begin. The Gemara says, are you allowed to use Meiser Sheni money? That's an example for money which you're already obligated to bring to Yerushalayim, to spend in Yerushalayim, or to bring to the Beis HaMikdash. Are you allowed to use that to buy Karbanos Chagiga? One has an obligation to bring a Karban Chagiga every Yom Tov, on the first day of Yom Tov, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Whether he has Meiser Sheni money to spend or not, he has an obligation to bring that. That's part of the mitzvah of V'samachta b'chagecha. So the question is, can you use previous obligations for that? So the Gemara has said, Beis Hillel says you're allowed to use Meiser money, and Beis Shammai says you're not. So the Gemara asks, I don't understand Beis Hillel. We have a rule. You're not allowed to use Kodesh money. It's already under obligation to do another mitzvah. You can only use Chulin. You can only use mundane money or animals to fulfill another obligation. You can't combine, you cannot double up your obligations and try to, as it were, get two birds with one stone. You gotta have separate for each of them. So why does Beis Hillel say you're allowed to use Meiser Sheni money that you already owe to buy Karbanos Chagiga? So Gemara says what Beis Hillel means is not that you can use the entire Karban Chagiga obligation. You could use Meiser Sheni, but you can add Meiser Sheni money to regular money or to regular animal that you're going to use for a Karban Chagiga. Meaning to say as follows: you can buy yourself a Karban Chagiga. You can add Meiser Sheni money to that. That way, you're not keeping the obligation of a Karban Chagiga. You're bringing and you're buying a Karban Chagiga. You're just improving it and increasing it by adding Meiser Sheni money that you need to spend in Yerushalayim. Anyway, there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, that explains Beis Hillel. But the Gemara now says we have a machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Chizkiya. How do you add funds to your Karban Chagiga? According to Chizkiya, you have to add additional animals. You can have one animal that you buy with complete chulin money, that's non-obligated funds. You're going to take that and you're going to buy an animal, and that'll be a Karban Chagiga. That is complete Karban Chagiga. With that, you fulfill the mitzvah of Karbanos Chagiga. You want to add more animals? You want to make more Karbanos Chagiga? Okay, you could do that. You could use Meiser Sheni money for that. That's additional extra stuff. But you have to have at least one animal that's completely fulfilling the mitzvah of Karban Chagiga. You can add more animals. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, though, it's not that you could add more animals. You could add more money and buy one bigger animal. So if you have a certain amount of chulin money set aside to buy, you can use a certain amount of chulin money to buy a Karban Chagiga. If you have Meiser Sheni money, you could add that to the pot of money and buy a bigger animal. That animal will have mixed monies used to purchase it. Some of it will be Karban Chagiga, chulin, that's fulfilling the mitzvah of a Karban Chagiga, and some of it will be Meiser Sheni money. Now that's fine as long as it's mixed together. Now there's an advantage to each position. In Chizkiya's approach, where you have one animal, you have fulfilled the obligation with one complete animal. With Rabbi Yochanan's approach, you have chulin money in every bite you take. It all has some chulin. It all has mitzvah chagiga in it. So if you have a lot of people that are eating in your Suda and you're going to give out a couple of different animals worth of chagiga, in a Chizkiya's way of doing it, some of them won't get real chagiga. They'll get extra stuff that's Meiser Sheni money. But at least you have one complete animal that fulfills the mitzvah. According to Rav Yochanan's approach, you'll make sure that every bite, every piece of meat, and everything that's given out will have a mixture of chulin and pre-obligation Meiser Sheni money involved with it. Okay, now, the Gemara says, what is the source of this? So the Gemara doesn't say source, but it says two brises. One, a brise which seems to support each position. So the first one is one that supports Rav Yochanan, that you're allowed to mix monies together to buy a bigger animal. And he quotes the pasuk, so it says misas. You should bring misas nidvas yadcha. What's a misas? So the Gemara says misas means chulin. It has to be mundane, not under previous obligation funds. So you can see that from the fact that in the end of the Megillah it says V'yasam Melech Achashverosh mas al ha'aretz. Achashverosh put a mas, put a tax. So that's mundane. So therefore misas means a mundane source. So you're supposed to use mundane funds. However, then it adds and it says Kasher Yavarech Hashem L'Kacha. You're allowed to add other things which Hashem blessed you with. So therefore you're allowed to add Meiser Sheni money. You can mix the two together. Now the word that's used here is says Imratza Le'arev Me'arev. Mixing together is language you would use for money. You're mixing funds together and you end up with one combined, unified pot of money that you're going to use to buy one animal. That's clearly supporting Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara doesn't challenge that. That in Brisa certainly supports Rabbi Yochanan. But now the Gemara has another Brisa, which the Gemara first says supports Chizkiah. Then later, after the Mishnah, the Gemara is going to change its understanding of this Brisa. The Brisa says, again from the word Misas, it teaches that you have to bring Chulin. And now we have in B'chokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, what do you have to bring from Chulin? Beis Shammai, of course, as we saw earlier, says that you have to bring only Chulin. You cannot add any funds, as we saw. So Beis Shammai says the entire Karban Chagiga has to be brought from Chulin. You cannot add anything. What you want to bring on the second day of Yom Tov, the third day of Yom Tov, that's Shalmei Simcha. That you could bring Meiser Sheni money for that. That's not obligatory karbonos anyway. But the Karban Chagiga has to be pure Chulin. Now, Beis Hillel says, Achila Rishona, the first eating has to be Chulin, then you can add Meiser. Now, that's within the first day of Yom Tov. So the first day you could have both. Your first Achila, the Gemara says, your first Achila means your first animal. That animal should be completely Chulin. After that, even on the first day, you could add Meiser Sheni money, use that to buy additional animals. And therefore, you have a support for Chizkiah's approach. That first animal is going to be Chulin. That's Karban Chagiga. Any additional Chagigas you want to bring could be Meiser Sheni. Now, the Brisa continues and says that Beis Hillel says that if you want to bring something on a different day, you could even use Meiser Behema, not just Meiser Sheni, but you could use animals that they themselves are Meiser. We have a halacha of Meiser Behema. You have to take every 10th animal born within a certain year and bring it as Meiser. It's a carbon. You give it to the Kohen. You could even use that. Well, you don't give it to the Kohen, but you bring it to Yerushalayim and you give it to the Kohen as a carbon shlomim, and then you can eat it. So you could even use that for your karbonos shalmei simcha that you're going to bring the rest of Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, why can't you use that for the carbon on the first day? If you're allowed to use Meiser Sheni money, why can't I use Meiser Behema for those karbonos, those extra chagigas on the first day? Gemara says, really, technically you could, but we have a concern that we say that you shouldn't. We're afraid that you're going to actually make an animal meiser on the first day of Yom Tov. You may say, oh, if I would have my animals already meisered, I could use the meiser animals for karbonos today, but I forgot to. You know what? Let me do it now. And you'll go meiser, select the animals, which will be meiser behema, and then use them for karbonos. You can't do that on Yom Tov. The Gemara says, why can't I do that on Yom Tov? Says you can't do that because part of the procedure is painting a red stripe on its back as it passes through the corral. When you're counting, you paint a red stripe on every 10th animal, and we don't want you to do that because you're not allowed to paint, you're not allowed to color on Yom Tov, and therefore you can't do that, and therefore we say that you shouldn't even bring any Meiser Sheni, any Meiser Behema Karbanos on the first day of Yom Tov because that's Yom Tov. And Chol Hamoed, then you're allowed to do that. We're not concerned about that. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to discuss the next part of our Mishnah, which had said that you're allowed to use any obligations for Shalmei Simcha. Gemara quotes a Brisa that says the pasuk v'samachta b'chagecha tells me I'm allowed to use anything for Simcha. You're allowed to use previous obligations, Nedarim, Nedavos, Meiser Behema. If you're a Kohen, you can use a Karban Chatas, Karban Asham, Bachar, Chazav V'shok. All these things you're allowed to use. Because it says v'samachta, you should be happy b'chagecha in your Chag. Now, you cannot use birds or carbon mincha, and the reason for that, the Gemara says, is one of two sources. Either it says v'samachto b'chagecha, we link the simcha karbanos to the chag, to the chagiga, just like chagiga has to be an animal, because it says there that you shouldn't leave over chalev, only animals of chalev. So that teaches you that the karbanos Shalmei Simcha also have to be like chag, they also have to be from an animal and not from birds or karbanos. The second source is in the fact that it says v'samachta, you have to be happy with it. Real simcha only comes from beef, from actual animal meat. It doesn't come from birds or korbanos mincha. Now the Gemara says, according to the first approach, what is the extra? According to the second approach, what's the extra word chag for? Why doesn't it just say v'samachta? Why do you have to say b'chagecha? Gemara says that's to tell you that you're not allowed to get married in Yom Tov because you ain't ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. We don't want you to be happy about the fact that you just got married. We want you to be happy only about the fact that it's a chag. So it's v'samachta b'chagecha. not be'ishtecha. B'chagecha, that should be your only source of simcha on the chag, not the fact that you're making a wedding. Okay, now we introduce a new Mishnah, but it's going to take us back to the same subject. The Mishnah discusses 4 types of people and how many karbanos chagiga they should bring and how many olos re'iyah they should bring. Now, the olos re'iyah just costs you money. It's a mitzvah and it costs funds. You have to be able to afford it. You can bring as many as you want, but it's not something you're going to eat. The karban chagiga you'll be eating, so that if you don't have too many funds, that at least you'll be able to eat. So the Gemara says somebody who has a lot of people eating in his house, he needs a lot of food, and he doesn't have any money, doesn't have enough money, so he could bring a lot of karbanos shlomim, he could bring a lot of karbanos chagiga, but he won't bring more than 1 olas re'iyah. He'll only bring 1 because that's not something that's going to give him food. He can't afford. He has to spend his money on things he'll be able to eat, like karbanos shlomim. He's not going to bring extra olas re'iyah. Somebody who has not too many people eating and he has plenty of money, so he's going to bring a lot of karbanos ola, because that's all mitzvah of karban ola, and he doesn't need more food. Somebody who has very little of both, doesn't have too many people eating, and doesn't have too much money, so he has a minimum share. And on that we have machlokes b'sil v'shamai, whether it's 1 silver ma, or 2 silver ma, which is for which is for the karban chagiga, which is the karban olas re'iyah. And the last one is somebody who has plenty of both, and on that it says ishke matnas yadek v'kasa shem kecha shenas alach, no limit. You can bring as much as you want according to the blessing that Shem has given you. Alright, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara asks, so we said somebody who doesn't have too much money should bring a lot of karbanos chagiga. Where is he affording karbanos chagiga if he doesn't have money? So Gemara answers, obviously he's going to add meiser sheni money. He's going to add other monies that he already owes. Now, Rav Chizda is the one who says it, and the particular language he uses is you could add and bring a bigger animal, a bigger cow. That's clearly going like the opinion of Rav Yochanan, that you're allowed to mix monies together and buy a bigger animal. Rav Sheshes asked, but we said you're supposed to add animals, additional animals if you want to add. Not that you're supposed to add, well, he doesn't say this, but he says, the implication is that he's saying that you're not supposed to add additional monies to buy a bigger animal. You're supposed to add additional animals to buy more animals for more karbanos chagiga. And he's essentially quoting Chizkiah. So Gemara asks, if he's quoting Chizkiah, let him say straight. Let him say you're not allowed to add money to buy a bigger carbon. You're only allowed to do it by adding animals. Why does he only quote what you are allowed to do? That doesn't contest what Rav Chizda said. Why is he telling you you're allowed to add animals to animals, and by implication I'm supposed to figure out you're not allowed to add money to buy a bigger animal, and that's a kasha on Rav Chizda. Let him say straight. So the Gemara says, obviously then Rav Sheshes is quoting a third opinion. He's saying you're allowed to do both. You're allowed to add animals to animals, and you're allowed to add money to buy a bigger animal. And he's therefore challenging Rav Chizda. He's saying, why are you saying that he should add money to buy a bigger animal? He could do either one. Gemara says, if Rav Sheshes holds that way, it doesn't fit not with Rav Yochanan and not with Chizkiah. Chizkiah, they each said that theirs is the only way to do it. Chizkiah said you're only allowed to add animals, and you have to at least have one animal that's going to fulfill the mitzvah of chagiga with no mixed in meiser sheni money. And Rav Yochanan had said you have to add money and buy a bigger animal. That way, every bite has a bit of chulin in it. So nobody said you could do either one. So the Gemara says, okay, so maybe it's the third opinion. Chizkiah and Rav Yochanan are both Amoraim. Is the third Amoraim? Rav Sheshes says they both have an advantage. You're allowed to do both of them. So the Gemara says that can't be, because we had a brisa supporting each of them, and now he is not like any of the two brises. He's got to fit with one of the brises. So the Gemara says, I'll tell you the truth. You misunderstood the second brisa. The brisa you said supports Chizkiah because it says your first achila has to be chulin. You thought that meant your first animal has to be chulin and you have additional animals. Now what it means? It means your first bite should have chulin in it. You have to have some chulin money, but you're allowed to add more money and mix it. And therefore that price is really saying both ways. It's saying you could add money to money and buy a bigger animal, or it's saying you could add you could add additional animals and have both chulin animals and meiser sheni animals combined in your karbanos chagiga. Okay, now the Gemara goes to discuss what happens if somebody bought 10 chagigas. He wants to bring 10 animals as a chagiga. The first day he brings only 5. Can he bring more karbanos chagiga the second day? Or is it a problem of Baal Tosef? The mitzvah of chagiga is only the first day of Yom Tov. If you would be bringing Shalmei Simcha in later days, that's fine. But here he brought 10 karbanos chagiga. Is he bringing a karban chagiga on the wrong day? And that's Baal Tosef. He's adding on a mitzvah that he's not allowed to do. Gemara says that Reish Lakish says no problem, he can keep on bringing it further. And Rabbi Yochanan says no, once he stops on the first day, he cannot bring another round of Karbanos Chagiga. That would be Baal Tosef. The other Gemara says there's three circumstances in which Rabbi Yochanan does not have a problem with it. Circumstance number one is if he simply ran out of time on the first day. Then it's clear that he's just continuing his previous obligation. He's not trying to do a second mitzvah of Karban Chagiga, bringing on the second day. He's finishing up what he did before. It's called a Tashlumin. We know that a later day of Yom Tov is allowed to fill in an obligation which you had the first day. So he's filling an obligation he didn't manage to do. Or, second situation, is if he ran out of people to eat it, didn't have enough mouths to eat all the Karbanos Chagiga the first day. So he said, okay, I'm going to keep bringing the rest of my Chagigos when the people are ready to eat more. And therefore, that's also not a problem of Baal Tosef. Third situation is where he clearly specified. He said, all 10 of these are the original Karban Chagiga from the first day. 10 Chagigas. Not a second round of Chagiga for the second day. It's all first day. And he's going to bring, and he ends up bringing some the first day, some the second day, but it's also filling in for the first day. Now, the Gemara says, that's the main Chiddush here, that Rav Yochanan holds that way. Rav Yochanan holds that you are allowed to specify that this is all Karban Chagiga, and then it's not a problem. The Gemara says that, I will prove to you that Rav Yochanan really agrees this way, because when Ravin came, he quoted Rav Yochanan, and he said the case, clearly saying that you are allowed to bring the remainder of your Chagigos on the second day, contradicting what we had said earlier. And it must be one is talking about where he didn't specify that it's all part of the original Chagiga set, and one where he did specify, and if he did specify, then it's not a problem. The Gemara continues, Rav Shimon bar Abba says, name of Rav Yochanan, clearly that it's only a problem to continue bringing them if he didn't finish the first day. Gemara says, didn't finish, what did he not finish? If he didn't finish the first day, that's where there is a problem. But if he finished the first day, then there's no problem. Gemara says if he finished the first day, what do you mean he finished the first day? You mean he brought all the karbanos? So what's he bringing the second day? Obviously, it doesn't mean that the animals finished. It means to say that the day finished, that he ran out of time. If he ran out of time, then he's allowed to continue bringing because it's not a problem that it's not Baal Tosef. So it's clear that it's all part of the original set of Chagiga, and he just ran out of time to bring them all.